I've always believed that neighborhoods are built on trust. Quiet mornings, polite nods, shared fences, and the unspoken agreement that everyone minds their own business. But the day she moved in, that peace disappeared like a gust of wind slamming a door shut. You know the type, clipboard in hand, sunglasses that hide everything except the judgment in her voice, and the title HOA director, said as if it were royalty. Around here, everyone called her the HOA Karen. I didn't like the nickname, but I also couldn't deny how perfectly it fit. I tried to stay out of her way, but she always found an excuse to poke her nose into my yard. A leaf on the driveway? Violation. Trash bin out a minute too early? Warning notice. A guest parked in front of my mailbox? Immediate email with CCs to the entire HOA board. So when she marched up to my porch one Saturday morning, heels clicking like a countdown, I already knew trouble was coming. I just didn't know how big. "I'm filing an official complaint," she announced before I could even say good morning. "Your fence is 2 inches over the property line. I'm demanding a land survey. Immediately."
Ist der Herr stunned?
2 inches? I'd lived here longer than she'd been in the state. That fence had stood untouched for years. I could have refused, but something in her tone, sharp, eager, almost hungry for conflict, made me pause. Fighting her now would only drag things out. And honestly, I wanted to prove her wrong. "Fine," I said. "Call your survey." I thought the worst thing I'd lose was an afternoon and some patience. I didn't expect the surveyor's face to go pale. I didn't expect him to keep checking the coordinates like he was afraid the ground might disappear under his feet. And I definitely didn't expect him to say the words that would flip our entire neighborhood upside down. "There's a problem," he whispered, looking from his tablet to Karen's house and back again. "A huge problem." Karen rolled her eyes. Yes, his fence is over the line. Can we move on?" The surveyor swallowed hard. "Ma'am, half of your house is built on his property." For a moment, the whole world fell silent. Even the birds stopped. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I stood there frozen, not sure whether to laugh, panic, or just sit down and let the universe explain itself. The surveyor showed the map clean, official, undeniable. The property line cut right through her kitchen, her living room, even her bedroom. Somehow, through years of construction, inspections, and HOA ego, no one had noticed the truth. She demanded he recheck it. He did, 3 times. The results never changed. And suddenly, the woman who had weaponized every rule, every regulation, every inch of the neighborhood, had just discovered that half her house legally belonged to the very man she tried to control. She looked at me like I had personally tilted the planet. "This is impossible," she muttered, voice shaking for the first time since I'd met her. "There has to be some mistake." But there wasn't. The tension in the air was thick. Shock, fear, confusion, all swirling together. She kept stepping backward as if distance could rewrite the truth. The neighbors stood on sidewalks pretending not to stare. And me? I was still trying to wrap my head around a reality where I technically owned half her home. But the strangest part wasn't the map, or her reaction, or the fact that the HOA director had accidentally triggered her own downfall. It was the way she suddenly looked smaller, nervous, fragile, almost human for the first time. I'd never seen her like that. And for just a second, I wondered if this situation would turn into something far more complicated than a property dispute. Because there was something she hadn't told me yet. Something the surveyor hadn't explained. And something about the way she whispered, "We need to talk," privately, made my stomach twist with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Before I could ask what she meant, she grabbed her phone, checked something on the screen, and her face turned ghost white. Then she said the words that changed everything. "You have no idea what this means, and what's coming next." When she told me we needed to talk privately, I thought it was just another attempt to regain control. Another HOA tactic, another rule, another threat wrapped in a polite smile. But the look in her eyes said something different this time. There was fear in them. Real fear. And maybe something else too. Something like regret. She glanced around at the neighbors who were still pretending not to eavesdrop, then motioned for me to follow her toward the side of her house. Well, technically our house now, if the survey was right. The moment we stepped into the shade, her shoulders lifted as she inhaled shakily, as if she'd been waiting years to say something but never found the courage. I didn't push. I just stood there, trying to make sense of the bizarre situation I'd been thrown into. "You don't understand what this survey means," she said quietly, almost trembling. "This wasn't supposed to happen." I wanted to ask what wasn't supposed to happen, but before I could, she turned away, rubbing her forehead like she was fighting memories she didn't want to revisit. And that's when I realized something important. This woman wasn't just a strict HOA director with endless rules. She was someone carrying a story I didn't know yet, and somehow that story was tangled deeply with this land. I leaned against the wall and took a breath, trying to steady my thoughts. The truth was, I had avoided getting to know her ever since she moved in 6 months ago. She arrived with force, leading board meetings within a week, pushing for higher standards, sending neighborhood-wide emails at 5 a.m. People whispered about her past, but nobody knew it clearly. Some said she'd come from a failed HOA where things went wrong. Others said she'd gone through a rough divorce and retreated here for a fresh start. None of us knew for sure. I remember the first time I saw her. She looked like someone trying too hard to keep everything perfect, as if perfection was the only thing strong enough to hold her together. Every clipped rule, every complaint, every stern look, it suddenly felt less like control, more like a shield, a way to hide whatever she didn't want the world to see. Maybe that's why I didn't walk away when she whispered, "Please, just listen for a minute." She exhaled and finally met my eyes. "Half my house being on your property isn't just a legal issue. It exposes something I've been trying to avoid for years, something I hope to leave behind." Her words hung in the air, heavy and fragile. "Look," I said, trying to stay calm, "I'm not trying to ruin your life. I didn't ask for this." She gave a humorless laugh. "No one asks for this kind of truth." I had no idea what she meant, but my gut told me the situation went far deeper than property lines. And the more she hesitated, the more the tension between us grew, like two people standing on opposite sides of a secret neither was ready to reveal. Then her phone buzzed again. She checked the screen, and the way her face changed, it was like watching a wall collapse. She turned pale, then frantic, then strangely resigned. Whoever was messaging her wasn't just bothering her, they were haunting her. She closed her eyes for a moment like she was gathering courage. "I need to tell you something about this land," she finally said. "About why I pushed for the survey. About why I couldn't let it go." My heartbeat kicked up. "Then tell me." But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she looked toward the street, her expression tightening as another car slowed down, the driver staring at the survey markers. Word was already spreading. In that moment, I noticed something else too. The house, her house, had subtle signs I never paid attention to before. A patched corner, a slightly newer foundation slab under one section, a mismatch of paint shades near the back door. Like parts of the home had been rebuilt quietly, maybe quickly. And suddenly a thought I'd never considered crept in. What if she already knew this land dispute was possible? What if she'd been hiding something long before she knocked on my door with her clipboard? She took a deep breath, gripping her phone tightly. "Listen. Once this gets out, things are going to move fast. Faster than either of us can handle." "Why?" I asked. Her eyes met mine, fearful, vulnerable, desperate. "Because someone out there wants this land more than both of us combined. And they're not going to stop now." Before I could respond, she stepped back, glancing at the approaching car as if she recognized it. And then she said, "You need to be ready. They're coming." The car that slowed in front of her house didn't stop at first. It cruised by like any other passing vehicle, but the way Karen's eyes followed it, sharp, tense, bordering on terrified, told me it wasn't just a car. It was someone she knew, someone she'd been hoping wouldn't show up. I watched her swallow hard, her fingers shaking slightly as she tried to look casual. But the fear slipped through her mask anyway. This wasn't the same iron-willed HOA director who scolded neighbors about lawn heights. This was someone bracing for a storm she'd been running from. She didn't explain who was inside the car, and I didn't ask. Not yet. But at that moment, something became very clear. Whatever secret she was hiding, it had finally caught up to her. The car disappeared around the corner, but the tension lingered like a thick fog between us. She stepped back, trying to regain her composure, the old authoritative edge creeping back into her voice. "We need to handle this quietly," she said. "If the HOA board finds out before I explain everything, they'll use it against me." I raised an eyebrow. "Since when does the board go after its own president?" Her lips tightened. "Since the board isn't as loyal as they pretend to be." There it was, another crack in her perfect facade. And suddenly, I could feel the ground shifting beneath both of us. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. This was a web of grudges, power struggles, and buried mistakes. And whether I wanted it or not, I was now tangled in every thread. But the real trouble started when I got a text message of my own. An unknown number. No name. Just one chilling sentence. "You're about to inherit more than land." I didn't show her the text, but it sat in my pocket like a weight, pulling at the edges of my calm. I didn't know whether to laugh, panic, or call the police. Who even knew about the survey this fast? Only 3 people, me, the surveyor, and Karen. I glanced at her, and for a moment, I wondered if she had sent it. But the fear in her eyes wasn't fake. And besides, the message felt like it came from someone watching from a distance, not from someone standing right beside me. Before I could process it, my neighbor Mrs. Turner walked up the sidewalk, waving. "You two all right?" she asked, lowering her voice as she got closer. Half the street saw the surveyor's face. Looked like he'd seen a ghost. Karen stiffened instantly. Mrs. Turner was sweet, but she loved gossip like oxygen. The kind of person who could spark a rumor before a match even lit. Karen forced a tight smile. "Just a small misunderstanding with the property lines," she said. Mrs. Turner's eyebrows shot up. "Small? Honey, he was marking right through your living room." I felt the heat rise in Karen's cheeks. She hated losing control, especially in front of someone who'd carry the story to every doorstep by sunset. But instead of snapping, Karen just whispered, "It's being handled." Mrs. Turner leaned closer to me. "You be careful," she murmured. "Karen's not the only one with eyes on that land." But before I could ask what she meant, she walked back down the street, humming like she'd delivered a message and wanted no part of the consequences. My pulse quickened. That was the second warning. 2 different people, 2 different tones, same message. This land wasn't normal property. Something about it mattered to people who had nothing to do with us. And with every passing minute, the sense of being watched grew stronger. As the sun dipped lower, Karen finally let out a shaky breath and said, "I should tell you the truth about how I ended up here." She sat on the small stone step beside the side door, well, technically my property now, and looked out at the street. She spoke slowly, like each word took effort. "When I bought this house," she began, "I didn't know about the old records. The previous owner didn't mention anything. But I kept getting these letters, unsigned warnings, threats. I thought it was just harassment from someone who hated HOAs." She shook her head. "But the messages weren't about rules. They were about the land. This exact piece of property." My heart thudded. "What kind of threats?" She hesitated. "The kind that make you check your locks twice every night." A gust of wind pushed through the trees, scattering survey markers across the yard. She looked at them like they were ticking bombs. "And now," she whispered, "whoever's been sending those messages is about to find out the land doesn't belong entirely to me anymore." I felt the weight of her fear settle onto my shoulders. If someone had been targeting her because of this land, then by owning half her house, I'd become their new target too. Before I could say anything, her phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen, and her breath caught in her throat. This time, she didn't hide it. She turned the phone toward me, and the message said, "Both of you need to stop digging." The moment I read that message, "Both of you need to stop digging," a cold rush shot through my chest. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a promise, a threat, a shadow creeping closer. Karen's hands trembled as she lowered her phone. "It's starting again," she whispered. "I knew it." I knew the survey would trigger this. I stepped back, scanning the street. No cars, no people, no one obviously watching, but the silence felt wrong, heavy, like someone was holding their breath with us. Who is sending these? I asked. She shook her head. I don't know. I thought it was one person at first, but then the tone changed. And the timing. Some messages came from local numbers, others from out of state. It became impossible to track. Her voice cracked, but they always stopped as long as I left the land alone. I stared at her house, the rooms now technically split between our properties. And now that half of it's mine. She looked up at me with eyes full of guilt. They'll come after you too. A beat of silence. Then another message buzzed through. We both froze. She lifted the phone slowly, like touching it might detonate something. The message was shorter this time. It's not yours. It was never yours. A chill crawled across my skin. Okay, I said quietly. We're not safe standing out here. She nodded. For once, she wasn't directing, commanding, or criticizing. She was simply scared. We moved toward my house, just across the driveway, but it felt like a mile. The wind had picked up, tossing loose gravel across the asphalt. A tree branch cracked in the distance. Every sound felt amplified. Inside my living room, the tension followed us like a shadow. Karen paced, hands buried in her hair, while I tried to process the unfolding madness. A land dispute wasn't supposed to feel like a thriller. I should have told you sooner, she said, pacing faster. But I didn't want to drag anyone else into this. Into what, exactly? She stopped, looked at me, and for a second I thought she would finally spill everything. But instead, she said 3 words that made everything worse. It's complicated. I exhaled hard. Karen, half your house is legally mine. Whatever this is, I'm already part of it. You have to talk. She sat down on the edge of the couch. Let me start from the beginning. She didn't get the chance. A loud, sharp bang hit the side of my house. We both jumped. I rushed to the window. Nothing. Just the fence. The driveway. The evening sun dipping low like it was trying to hide before things got ugly. Another bang. This time closer. Karen's voice was a shaky whisper. They're testing us. I turned to her. Testing us for what? She shook her head. To see how fast we react. To see if we're scared. They always start like this. Always. That word hit hard. How long has this been happening? I asked. She hesitated. Then said, 5 years. 5 years. 5 years of silence. Threats. And fear buried under HOA memos and neighborhood rules. I didn't know whether to feel angry or sympathetic. Maybe both. Then something on my phone screen lit up. A notification. A video. From an unknown number. I clicked it. The footage was grainy, dark, but unmistakable. Someone had recorded Karen earlier, standing at the property line with me and the surveyor. From a distance. Hidden. The video ended with a shaky zoom on me holding the land documents. My stomach dropped. They're watching us, I said. Karen took one look at the screen and covered her mouth. No. 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 This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. She backed away from the phone like it was poison. Karen, I said firmly, tell me what they want. She squeezed her eyes shut. They want the land, not the house, not the HOA, just the land. And they'll do whatever they have to do to get it. I froze. Why this land? She shook her head slowly. Because something is buried here. Something that doesn't belong to either of us. My pulse spiked. Buried. She nodded. Tears forming. I found it once. Years ago. And when I covered it back up, the messages started. The room went still. What did you find? She opened her mouth to answer. But at that exact moment, headlights flashed across my window. Car pulled up. Slow. Deliberate. Engine humming low like a warning. Karen's face went ghost white. It's them, she whispered. The car door didn't open. No one stepped out. It just sat there in front of my house. Idling, watching. The engine revved once. Twice. And then the headlights shut off. The engine cut. Darkness swallowed the street. Karen grabbed my arm, nails digging into my skin. "They're not waiting anymore," she whispered. "The truth is coming whether we want it or not." And then, somewhere outside, a single footstep. The footstep outside wasn't loud. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't even threatening on its own. But the intent behind it sent a cold shiver slicing straight down my spine. Karen froze too, her fingers still locked around my arm. We waited for a second footstep, a voice, a shadow, anything. But nothing came, just silence, heavy, watching us. I moved toward the window slowly, careful not to make noise. Karen grabbed my sleeve as if she thought I might vanish the moment I looked outside. I pulled the curtain back a fraction of an inch. No one. Just the dark outline of the idling car, still sitting silently in front of my house as if its driver had melted into the night. But something was different. There was a new dent in the corner of my mailbox. A fresh scrape. Metallic. Sharp. Someone had walked right up to the front of my house and left a message carved into the metal. 3 letters, run. My heart hammered. Karen's breath hitched. "It's starting all over again," she whispered. "Just like before." Before. The word hung like a ghost between us. "Karen," I said, "you have to tell me what happened 5 years ago." She stared at the floor like she was replaying every mistake she'd ever made. "I found something on the property line, digging near the old foundation. Something I wasn't supposed to find." "What was it?" She looked at me, and for the first time, there was something new in her expression. Not fear, not panic, guilt. "I thought it was a time capsule," she said quietly. "A rusted metal box. Old, buried deep. Someone must have put it there decades ago." She swallowed. "So I opened it. And," her voice cracked on the next words, "it wasn't a time capsule." Before I could ask what it really was, my phone buzzed again. This time, a picture. A live photo, taken seconds earlier, from inside my front yard. Karen's eyes widened as she leaned over my shoulder. It was a picture of both of us, standing inside my living room, taken through the crack in the curtain I'd just touched, meaning someone had been right outside the window, watching, recording. Karen stumbled back as if the floor shifted beneath her.
No.
No, this isn't them. This is someone else." "What do you mean, someone else?" I demanded. She sank onto a chair, burying her face in her hands. "There isn't just one group after the land." That was the twist I wasn't expecting. "There are 2. She lifted her head, eyes red. "And they don't want the same thing." I felt the room tilt. "What's in the land, Karen? What did you find?" She hesitated, then forced the truth out like it was poison. The box didn't belong to the previous owner. It belonged to someone who disappeared years ago. Someone the police never found. My stomach dropped. "You're saying this is a missing person case?" "Not just a case." She shook her head. "A cover-up." The word slammed into me like a punch. "I didn't tell anyone what I found," she continued. "Not the HOA, not the police, no one. I got scared. I buried it back and tried to forget. And the messages started." She nodded. "At first, someone wanted to scare me off the property. Then another group tried to buy the land quietly. They offered double the price, triple, whatever I wanted." I blinked. "So one side wants to bury the truth, and the other wants to dig it up." Karen let out a shaky breath. "Exactly. And now that half the house is mine." "They think you know," she whispered. "Both sides. They think you know everything." Another message buzzed. Short, cold. "You chose the wrong person to trust." Karen stiffened. "They're trying to turn us against each other." "Who?" I asked. "Which side?" She shook her head. "I don't know anymore." I paced the room, my adrenaline spiking. This wasn't a simple twist. This was a fracture in every direction. 2 groups, 2 motives, 1 buried secret, and we were standing right on top of it. Then another sound outside. This time not a footstep. A voice. Low, male, unfamiliar. "Karen, open the door." She went pale as paper. She whispered my name like a warning. That's him. Who? The person who disappeared, she said, trembling. The one I thought was dead. The voice came again, harder now. Karen, open the door. We're not done. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandfather's face. The years of sacrifice etched into his skin, and the image of the HOA board sitting around their polished table, acting like they owned the world, acting like we were nothing. But sunrise brought something else. Clarity. I drove straight to Miss Karen's house, not to fight, but to end this once and for all. She was already outside, pacing the driveway like she'd been waiting for a delivery that was running late. When she saw me, her expression tightened into the same condescending smirk she'd worn the first day she'd marched onto my land demanding that survey. I didn't say a word at first. I placed the folder in her hand, the one containing every mapped measurement, every archived title deed, and the finalized statement from the county's legal department. Her fingers trembled when she opened it. She skimmed the first page, then the second. Her lips parted slightly, and then she read the line I knew would hit her like a lightning strike. Portions of the structure identified as the homeowner's residence extend significantly beyond the original boundary and are situated on privately owned land belonging to. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Her eyes shot up, wide and shaken. You can't be serious. This is wrong. This can't be right. It's accurate, I said quietly. You insisted on the survey. You demanded it. Now we're all living with the results. For once, she didn't talk back.
No threats.
No HOA bylaws quoted at rapid-fire speed. Just silence, the kind of silence that descends when a person's world begins to tilt. But I wasn't done. You and the board tried to force my grandfather out. You weaponized rules that didn't even apply. You harassed a man who never bothered anyone. And you knew exactly what you were doing. She closed the folder slowly, like each inch added weight to her shoulders. I didn't know, she whispered. Maybe not at first, I said. But when you saw how stressed he looked, when you kept pushing anyway, that was your choice. Her driveway felt smaller now. Even the air seemed tighter. She had nowhere to go, nowhere to hide behind her authority. Are you planning to take the part of the house that overlaps? She asked, her voice barely stable. That depends on you, I said, because right now, half of your living room, most of your kitchen, and the corner of your garage are legally standing on my land. Her face drained of color. I let the moment sit, not as punishment, though part of me wanted that, but because truth sometimes needs space to breathe. Finally, I added, I don't want your house. I don't want revenge. I want fairness. I want everything you denied my grandfather. She swallowed hard. What do you want me to do? First, I said, you're going to stop targeting him. No more fines. No more letters. No more violations fabricated out of spite. She nodded quickly, almost desperately. Second, you're going to present this, I tapped the folder, to the HOA board. Not me. You're going to tell them exactly what happened. She looked like she'd rather collapse than walk into that meeting, but she nodded again. And lastly, I said, you're going to sign the agreement drawn up by the county, recognizing the boundary change and leasing the land from me officially. That way no one can use it against you years from now. Her eyes flicked with relief she didn't dare voice. But before she could say anything, I gave her the final twist, one she never would have seen coming. And after that, I continued, you're going to help clean up my grandfather's name, because what you don't know, what I didn't know until yesterday, is that he wasn't just a neighbor you harassed. She blinked, confused. I held up an old photograph, folded neatly from my grandfather's records. It showed a younger version of him standing beside a newly built fence line, smiling with pride. And next to him was Karen's father. They built this neighborhood together, I told her softly. Your father and my grandfather. That's why the old boundaries were never changed. They trusted each other. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. A connection she never imagined. A mistake she couldn't undo. And suddenly, All the hostility between our families felt like a tragic misunderstanding layered over years of distance and pride. When she finally met my eyes, there was no anger left, just remorse. "I'll fix this," she said quietly. "All of it." For the first time, I believed her. Later that week, the HOA board gathered. Karen presented everything, the survey, the legal documents, the truth about her father and mine. She took responsibility. She didn't soften her mistakes. And when the board voted unanimously to void every violation against my grandfather, she didn't even look relieved. She looked humbled. As for the land lease, she signed it, gladly. But the final twist came days later, when the county clerk called me back. "We found something else," she said. And what she told me didn't just reframe the story, it changed the entire future of the land itself. When the county clerk called, her voice carried that careful steadiness people use when they're about to drop something heavy, but important. "We located an older land record connected to your grandfather," she said. "It predates the neighborhood. You should come in." So I went. She handed me a thin, aging folder. Inside was a handwritten agreement. Not a formal contract, not notarized or official by today's standards, but still powerful. It was an agreement between my grandfather and Karen's father, back when the land was just empty fields and barbed wire fences. 2 signatures, 2 men, 1 simple promise. If either of us ever needs help, the other will not turn away. No legal jargon, no conditions, just trust. The clerk explained that it didn't hold legal weight, but historically, emotionally, it was significant. A reminder of what the place had meant long before HOA rules, long before fences measured inches and grudges were built like walls. I left the office feeling something I hadn't felt since this whole fight began. Peace. When I reached home, my grandfather was resting on the porch. He looked weaker than he used to, but when he smiled, it was the same smile from that old photograph. Weathered, warm, patient. I sat beside him and placed the folded agreement in his lap. He stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "I thought this was lost." "You never told me about it," I said. He chuckled softly. "Your generation has phones and screens. We had promises. Sometimes those lasted longer." A breeze moved through the trees. Birds rustled. For the first time in weeks, the land felt calm. I told him everything, the survey, the board meeting, Karen's apology, the lease agreement. When I mentioned the moment she realized her father had once built a boundary with him, his eyes softened. "She's her father's daughter," he said. "Stubborn, proud, just like you." We both laughed, and for a moment it felt like the weight of the past month lifted. Not erased, just finally light enough to carry without breaking. A few days later, Karen came by. Not as the HOA president. Not as the woman who had tried to evict us. Just as someone who wanted to make things right. She brought a potted plant, a small olive tree, and set it gently on the porch. "For the property line," she said, managing an awkward smile. "A new start." My grandfather stood slowly, leaning on me for balance, and nodded. "Thank you," he said. And somehow those 2 words carried more forgiveness than I expected. Karen didn't stay long. She didn't need to. Some apologies are bigger when they're quiet. As weeks passed, the tension in the neighborhood dissolved. Fences were repaired. Dead leaves were cleared from gutters. People nodded hello again. The HOA board even approved a community event, something they hadn't done in years. Funny how a land survey meant to create division ended up rebuilding connection. Even the house that overlapped our property changed. Karen had contractors come through, adjusting her layout to match the new lease boundaries. At one point, she invited my grandfather to look at the finished space. He declined, but he smiled when she asked. And through it all, the land, our land, felt different. Not just because we'd protected it, but because we now understood its history, the stories built into its soil, the promises buried beneath layers of misunderstanding. Looking back, I realized something. This was never just about boundaries. It was about what we inherit, pride, goodwill, grudges, memories, and what we choose to pass on. My grandfather taught me that lines on a map mean nothing if the people living on either side forget how to be neighbors. And Karen learned that authority means nothing if it isn't backed by fairness and empathy. One afternoon, as we watched the sun set behind the trees, my grandfather said something that stayed with me. "Land doesn't make us who we are," he murmured, "but how we treat each other while standing on it. That's what people remember." Maybe that's the lesson buried in this whole storm, that doing right by others is worth more than any HOA rulebook or property line ever drawn. If you take anything from our story, let it be this: stand your ground, but never lose your humanity. Because boundaries can shift, but integrity stays. And if you're still here listening, supporting, learning with me, do me a favor, like the video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear this, not for the algorithm, but because real-life stories like this remind us why community matters. Thank you for being part of ours.